Hey, so today I want to talk to you about culture. And this is another one of those situations. I keep saying this all the time that there's a lot that you can learn about culture just by the Google machine or the textbook. There's a lot of stuff in there about culture. But sometimes I like to offer my take on it because there's certain things that I want you to pay attention to, like certain maybe umbrella ways that I think makes it easier to understand a whole host of information. And in some ways, it's the way that I've always taught it or the way that I learned it. And so I want to make sure that I share it with you. And to start it off, for instance, your book gives you the definition of culture as shared beliefs, values, and practices. That's the truth. But I think what's missing in that definition, a more convoluted one, is that it's learned and shared beliefs, right? It's learned culture. Culture is not just shared, it's learned. And we'll talk about the processes by which we come to understand the culture of our society. And more importantly, that definition doesn't tell you anything about how culture is associated with a group or a society. Very soon we'll define society, and we need to know culture before we can define society. And at some point, we'll also talk about groups. So culture isn't just this thing that's out there, it's associated with a group or a society. And it's not just shared behaviors, it is learned and shared behaviors. And those things are behaviors, attitudes, ideas, beliefs, so different types of cultural components. And that's the next thing that I want to talk about. You can come up with a lot of examples of culture that you know in the American culture, things like freedom or liberty or the eagle or the idea of individualism or the American dream and the quest for wealth. Like those are cultural symbols that you recognize in the American culture. And you can do that for your own ethnic or heritage culture. You even have culture in the places where you work or the fraternity or sorority that you might be a part of. There are culture associated with groups and culture associated with societies. We share that understanding, and there's usually a process by which we learn that understanding that we'll get to. So I like to talk about six elements of culture. I'm going to bring up my whiteboard again because it's kind of weird, but I like to write when I talk. Okay. So, six elements of culture. The first one that I want to talk about is this distinction between non-material and material culture. Material culture is very tangible things, stuff that we make, things that we use, things that we share. So things like buildings, things like fashion, things like jewelry, things like weapons, things like hairstyles. The stuff that when we look at it, if we can see it or touch it, those are material components of our culture. Those material components of our culture are usually very reflective of our non-material components of our culture, things like ideas and beliefs or customs, right? So if I gave you an example, if I was talking about something like fashion, again, I like to talk about fashion, the length of skirts. If I told you that we had, a lot of women wear short skirts, that could either be a question of a lack of modesty. It can be a question of freedom of individual choice. It can be a question of maybe resistance to pressures for modesty. If I talked about things like jewelry or lots of jewelry, lots of gold, lots of silver, maybe I'm in a culture that likes to celebrate natural resources or to really show off the having wealth, right? So things that we see and can touch or feel, those material components of our culture are usually very reflective of those non-material components of our culture. I like to say for the physical campus of Rock Valley College, if you're walking somewhere in like classroom building one where my office is, there's a lot of places to sit, a lot of places to study. And those places are not cubicles set off to the side. They tend to be with other places for other people to sit. There's quotes on the wall, all kinds of things to keep you engaged and keep you really interested in being reflective in your learning. And what we hope that that does, and I never asked anybody this, but I can see it, that kind of classroom building structure, those material choices that we make, reflects a culture of you belong here, take a seat, stay around, study here. Really build your understanding and reflect on your learning here. And in fact, sit with other people, maybe collaborate in your learning. As an institution, we could have had classroom, 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 bathroom, water fountain, door, and we could have sent you on your way. But that's not how we build our buildings, because we want our buildings to reflect the culture that we're hoping to pass on to the students, and we want our students to feel like they belong here. So the other thing that's very important is how technology focused we are in American culture, but very specifically, not just computers, for instance, but laptops. We need laptops, we need smartphones, we need tablets, we need things that we can put in our pocket because we got a lot of things to do and we got to go. So I don't want to have to sit at my desk with my computer all the time. I want my computer to be able to go with me. So our technological advances or the things that we use, again, that material culture is reflective of our non-material ideas and beliefs and things like that. The second component of culture that I really want to point out is symbols. And a symbol is anything that stands for something else. A wave is a gesture that stands for hello, or maybe I'm over here, or no, no, don't come. Like it's just a gesture. It's just an activity. A symbol like a swoosh would make you think of the company Nike. A symbol like an eagle will make you think of the country America, or any of those things that we attach to that feeling. So symbols stand in for other things, meanings that we understand. Those symbols allow us to sort of operate and let people know about our culture. A language is just a collection of those symbols. It's just a way that we can communicate our culture. Again, that's why I say it's not just about shared culture, it's about learned culture. We teach you what it is we want you to know in our culture through our language, through the words that we use, through the words that we expect, you to have. For instance, in the hallway in classroom building 1, again, there's quotes all around, places that things are meant to inspire you. If the quote simply just said hallway, then you would think there's nothing special going on here. I need to just walk through this space and get out of here. If the quote or the things on the wall in the building said things like welcome or student center, we would want to say, something is here for me. Maybe I should be sitting here. Oh, they've set this place aside for me. So we use those symbols, those language techniques, those signs, just our ability to transmit our culture and communicate our culture, or those secret words that you may have in some of your groups, or those things that people in the military might say to one another. It's how we communicate and transmit our culture. The fourth thing that I want to point out are values. Values is a culture's standard for discerning what is good or bad. It's moral or immoral, desirable or undesirable, proper or improper. And I want to make the distinction that values are not the same as beliefs. This is why I like to give this list, because in your book, it talks about values and it talks about beliefs, but I want you to see the relationship between those two. Again, it's how I learn. It's the way that I want to be able to point it off to you. Let me give you an example of how these things are distinguished. A value, again, is just a standard of what we believe to be right or not right, moral or immoral. The belief is a tenet. It's like a conviction. It's a truth statement. So in the United States, in our culture, the American culture, one of our values, for instance, is a quest for wealth, for instance, a quest for financial freedom. And if that's our value, if the American dream is a value, then we have a belief that says, if you work hard, if you work hard all the time, then you will achieve that American dream. What if your value wasn't for financial wealth and the American dream, home ownership and, cars and vacations? What if that's not your value? What if your value instead is belonging with your family or taking advantage of the natural world? If that's your value, you're not likely to have a belief about if you work hard, you will achieve that. That's not exactly the truth anymore. You might believe working so hard is going to take you away from your family. It's not going to be situated in your value system. If you work hard, you will, do a hard task on your body, and it'll take away your time for you to be able to enjoy your family or the world, right? If your value is the American dream, then that belief to work hard could even be, man, you might have to make some sacrifices. You might not get to spend as much time with your family, but it's okay because you're doing the part that you need to do for them in the long run, or you have to be able to set up your generations in the long run. So the beliefs, those truth statements will be reflective of those values otherwise. And so I don't want you to think about them interchangeably, although they are related. The fifth thing that's important to talk about, and I'm going to give you a new screen for this because there's some distinctions to make about this one. Number five are norms. And I need more space because I want you to see that there are both informal norms and formal norms. Formal norms are what we call folkways and mores, and I'll tell you the distinction between these. Informal norms are laws. A norm, your book gives you the definition, are visible and invisible rules of conduct through which societies are structured. In other words, it's the things that you are supposed to do. You have some belief systems, or you have a value system and some statements that you believe to be true based on those values. This is your set of rules. Now, what are you supposed to go do? These are the things that you must do then. They're casual behaviors. Informal norms are casual behaviors that are generally and widely conformed to. Again, this is why it's not just shared culture, it's learned culture, because you best believe somebody taught you the things that you're supposed to do. Folkways are like manners. Think about like table etiquette, or the idea that you learn to share in kindergarten, or the idea that you should help people if they drop something, or you should hold the door when you're coming into a building if somebody else is coming behind you. They're just general, everyday, day-to-day interactions, expectations of your behavior that you must do. We have an expectation that you know this. Somebody has taught you. We share this culture. We assume that everybody knows it. So much so that it's almost like nobody will give you the list of them to remind you of them. We just assume that you know. That's that learned process that I think is important. We don't just share it at some point. In order for you to be able to share it properly, you got to learn it. So folkways are just those manners. Mores are a little bit more deeper that we care about. I like to connect it to the word morals. So that's on the level of like, don't murder somebody else, or levels of taboo, like, no, you cannot marry your brother. Those are moral statements of things, like moral beliefs that show themselves into the things of what you must do or must not do. They're informal because they're just generally expected to be known. Norms that are formal are the ones that we cared about so much that we decided to write them down. So, for instance, a law is a formal norm. This is the thing that you're expected to do, but I'm not relying on the hope that you do it. I'm going to write it down. It's very formalized. So now I've got laws that tell me what's legal and not legal. Now I got the Rock Valley College Student Code of Conduct. This is the list of things that you must do or must not do. It's no longer just based on hoping that you know it in an informal fashion and just leave you to it. It's important enough that we decided to write it down. So laws are formalized in that way. And I don't believe your book distinguishes or tells you law as an example, but I do believe that it makes some distinction between formal and informal. One of the things that I like to point out when we're talking about this is these are the things that you must do. You must follow the norms of your culture. And if you don't, you will be sanctioned. This is another one of those places that your book talks about, but I don't think it gives you the best idea of it. The definition in your book says that a sanction is a way to authorize or formally disapprove of certain behaviors. It suggests that sanctions are always formal and that sanctions are always in disapproval. Um, and one of the ways you can think about that is the sanction that you get if you break a law. If you don't do what you must do with the law, that means you've done something illegal, and your sanction is to be formally disapproved, if you will. You might get arrested. You may have to go to jail. You've committed a crime. You have to pay for that. Those are formal negative sanctions. They're also formal positive sanctions. If you do that, what you're supposed to do in the Rock Valley College Student Code of Conduct, and you follow all the rules and you pass all your classes, then you'll graduate. You know what you'll get? A degree. You'll get a graduation ceremony. We'll put you in a funny hat and gown, and we'll walk you down the street, and people will, laugh and clap for you. They'll be so excited. That is a sanction. It's positive, but it's very formal, right? So you can have positive formal sanctions in the same way that you can have negative formal sanctions. On the flip side, you can also have informal sanctions or sanctions related to those informal norms. If you do something at the table where you break a folkway expectation, you put your elbow on the table, you blow your nose at the table when people are eating, or you don't help someone who's dropped everything when they're walking by you, you will be informally sanctioned. You'll get a look from your mom that says, no, no, child, you don't do that. Or the other people walking down the hall in classroom building one will say that you're so rude for letting someone drop and not help with the things that they needed to pick up, right? So people can negatively sanction you for your informal normative behavior, or the fact that you didn't follow the informal normative expectations. If you do follow the informal normative expectations, you do help someone, you do hold the door, you do hold open the elevator, then you probably will be praised. Someone may smile, someone at least may say thank you. People may tell you that you're very nice and very generous. That is also a sanction. So I want you to know norms are things that you must do, or else you'll be sanctioned. They can be positive or negative, formal or informal. Number 6, the last thing that I want to point out in this list of cultural components are rituals. I don't believe that your book talks about rituals in that chapter, but I keep it on my list because a ritual is a formal and repeated behavior that unites the people. It's a way by which we transmit and reinforce our norms. So when we get together for weddings, for instance, if we get together for funerals, for instance, it is the process by which we essentially come together as a group and reinforce what we believe about people getting married or families being started, the ways that we acknowledge the people in our community who's passed along. We have death ceremonies, for instance. It's just a way that we get together to reinforce the things that we believe in our society. And we've got very formal sort of ways that we carry out these ceremonies: when someone is born, when somebody dies, when somebody gets through puberty, bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah or quinceañera, or any other sort of process by which a culture may recognize someone that's moving into adulthood. There's all these sort of rites of passage or general rituals that are opportunities for the community to get together and reinforce those norms. There's things that you're supposed to do, things you're supposed to say, things that you're supposed to wear, acknowledgments that you're supposed to make. And just like I said, your beliefs are going to reflect your values, or your material culture will reflect your non-material culture. Your sanctions will reflect how important we consider a norm to be. If we consider it's important enough, we might write that thing down, or you might get stricter sanctions for it. Similarly, for rituals, we can see what kinds of values, what kinds of normative behavior we find to be particularly important, because they will show themselves in our rituals. And we expect people to participate. We expect people to show up. And in some ways, we formalize it. If you get married, you have to have a marriage license or a marriage certificate. The country needs to know. If you had a birth, you need a birth certificate. Somebody needs to know that the society has gained a person. If you've had a loss, there has to be a death certificate. So we formalize some of these processes because they are important enough in the way that we need to run our society. So those are the 6 components of culture that are in your book, but I wanted you to be able to think of them in that umbrella so that you can do a better job with remembering what the components are themselves. And that's the end of this one. Talk to you soon.